Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we're talking about a single sheet of paper from 1776 that did more than just start a country. It lit a fire that spread across the entire globe. You know the words, all men are created equal, endowed with rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the story of the Declaration of Independence isn't just about the United States. It's about how these words became a global blueprint for rebellion, a charter for human rights, and a promise that people are still fighting for today. This single document, written in a sweltering Philadelphia summer, was a declaration of war, a list of complaints, and a birth certificate. But it was also a message in a bottle, and the world was listening. So how did a document meant for a specific moment become a timeless charter for freedom? Let's find out. To understand the Declaration's global journey, you first have to understand what it was really for. The men in the Second Continental Congress weren't just waxing philosophical. They were making a desperate, calculated move on the world stage. Their main audience wasn't King George III, and it wasn't even their fellow colonists. It was the powers of the earth, the powerful nations of Europe, especially France. See, in the 18th century, there were rules for this sort of thing. A kind of international law. For the American Rebellion to be seen as a legitimate war between nations, and not just a messy civil war, they had to formally declare themselves independent. This was the signal to France that America was a serious, sovereign entity you could make treaties with. As Thomas Paine argued, a declaration was the necessary ticket to get foreign aid. So in a way, the Declaration of Independence was also a declaration of interdependence. It was America's formal application to join the international community. That long list of grievances against the king? It wasn't just complaining. It was a carefully constructed legal argument, designed to prove to a candid world that the colonists were justified in their rebellion. The reaction around the world was mixed. In Britain, the government commissioned a rebuttal and the press was mostly hostile. But elsewhere in Europe, it caused a stir. Translations popped up in Danish, Italian, and Polish. In France, it was a hot topic, though the government was cautious. The real turning point came in 1777, with the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga. That convinced France that the Americans could actually win. In 1778, they signed a formal alliance, and soon Spain and the Netherlands joined in. The Declaration had done its job. It had put the United States on the map. Perhaps the most immediate and powerful echo of the Declaration was heard in France. The American victory was a stunning upset. It proved that ordinary people could rise up and defeat a global superpower. For the French, who were dealing with their own deep-seated political and economic problems, this was a massive inspiration. The intellectual link was already there. French Enlightenment thinkers like Locke and Montesquieu had heavily influenced the American founders. Now, the Declaration sent those ideas back to France, but this time they came with a working model. The Marquis de Lafayette, the French hero of the American Revolution, was the key link. In 1789, he helped draft France's own revolutionary document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The influence is unmistakable. The French Declaration opens with, "Men are born and remain free and equal in rights," a clear echo of Jefferson's preamble. Both documents champion natural rights in government by the consent of the governed. But there was a key difference. The American Declaration was primarily about justifying the independence of a new nation. The French Declaration was more universal, an abstract statement of rights for all of humanity. In the long run, the French version had a greater global impact as a charter for individual freedoms, while the American version became the model for states seeking sovereignty. The revolutionary fire didn't stop in Europe. In the early 19th century, it jumped the Atlantic again, this time to Latin America. Creole elites, tired of Spanish colonial rule, looked at the United States and saw a blueprint for their own liberation. Leaders like Simón Bolívar and Francisco de Miranda were deeply inspired by the principles of self-governance. In 1811, Venezuela became the first South American nation to formally declare independence. Their declaration was a near-perfect mirror of the American one, listing grievances against Spain and proclaiming themselves a free and sovereign state. Many other Latin American nations followed this model, but here too, the ideals were adapted. The powerful rhetoric of universal rights often clashed with the reality of rigid social and racial hierarchies. In a truly radical interpretation, the Haitian Revolution, a successful slave uprising, took the Declaration's ideals to their logical conclusion, creating the first black-led republic in 1804 and directly challenging the institution of slavery that the United States still upheld. While the Declaration was inspiring revolutions abroad, its words were also being used to challenge injustice right back at home. This is the great paradox of liberty in American history. The country was founded on a ringing endorsement of equality, while practicing slavery and denying rights to women and many others. Generations of activists would brilliantly use the Declaration's own words to hold the nation accountable. The abolitionist movement, for example, wielded the Declaration like a sword. Frederick Douglass, a former slave turned towering intellectual, masterfully exposed the nation's hypocrisy. In his famous 1852 speech, he asked, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" He called the Declaration a, quote, glorious liberty document, but mourned that its promises didn't apply to him or millions of other Black Americans. He declared, "This 4th of July is yours, not mine." The women's suffrage movement also drew direct inspiration from the document. At the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others drafted the Declaration of Sentiments. It cleverly rewrote the original, starting with, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." It then listed grievances against the patriarchal system that denied women their rights. The echoes continued into the 20th century. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in his I Have a Dream speech, called the Declaration a, quote, to which every American was to fall heir. He argued that this note guaranteed the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all people, black and white. He framed the civil rights movement not as a radical new demand, but as a long overdue cashing of a check the nation had written in 1776. The global influence of the Declaration didn't fade after the first wave of revolutions. In the 20th century, as the age of empires began to crumble, anti-colonial movements across Asia and Africa looked to the American example as a beacon of hope. After World War I, President Woodrow Wilson championed the idea of self-determination. Nationalists from across Central Europe and Asia literally traveled to Independence Hall in Philadelphia to stake their own claims to freedom, signing their own declarations in the very same room where the original was adopted. But the most stunning example came in 1945. Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the Vietnamese independence movement, began his own Declaration of Independence from France by quoting Thomas Jefferson directly. "All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." He was using America's own founding words to make a powerful appeal for support against a European colonial power. The Indian independence movement, led by Mahatma Gandhi, also echoed the Declaration's language in its fight against British rule. However, this period was filled with irony. The United States, the original anti-colonial rebel, often found itself supporting its European allies, the colonial powers, during the Cold War. This created a deep contradiction, as America struggled to balance its founding ideals with its modern geopolitical interests. More than 2 centuries later, the Declaration of Independence is far from a historical relic. Its ideas are woven into the very fabric of international law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, is a direct descendant of the principles first laid down in 1776. Today, more than half of the world's countries have a founding document that can be called a Declaration of Independence, and many of them show the influence of the American original. Of course, the legacy is complex. The gap between the Declaration's lofty ideals and the reality of human experience remains a source of conflict. The question of who really is included in "all men are created equal" is a conversation we are still having today, all over the world. But maybe that's the point. The power of the Declaration of Independence isn't that it solved all our problems. Its power lies in the fact that it is a living document, a standard to strive for, and a constant source of inspiration. It is a reminder that the pursuit of freedom is a journey, not a destination. It's more than a document, it's a promise, a challenge, and an enduring testament to the power of an idea to change the world. Thanks for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online.